Welcome to another explainer, where we're going to reverse engineer one of the absolute greatest architectural and logistical mysteries of the ancient world. Today, we're looking at a monument that completely redefined human capability, an eternal structure that's captured our collective imagination for millennia. Let's jump right in. Okay, I want to start by throwing a staggering number at you. 2.3 million. That represents the estimated exact amount of individual limestone and granite blocks required to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. Just let that scale wash over you for a second. We're not talking about thousands of normal-sized bricks here. We're talking about millions of massive stone blocks, all needing to be quarried, transported, and perfectly placed. And when you realize what each of those numbers actually means in physical reality, it gets even more mind-boggling. Each of these millions of blocks weighed an average of 2.5 tons. They were meticulously stacked to reach an original height of 146.6 meters, or about 481 feet. That made it the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. The sheer scale is genuinely hard to wrap your head around, especially when you consider the era they were working in. Which brings us to the core focus of today's analysis. How exactly were 2.3 million massive blocks arranged and assembled back in the ancient world? I mean, how do you physically lift, stack, and organize millions of 2.5-ton stones with literal mathematical precision? Look, it wasn't magic, and it certainly wasn't aliens. It was masterful, extreme human engineering.
Part 1. The Mastermind, Pharaoh Khufu.
To really understand the execution of this seemingly impossible feat, we first have to look at the master organizer who made the whole shebang happen. That mastermind was Khufu, also known by his Greek name Cheops. Reigning roughly between 2589 and 2566 BC, he was the second pharaoh of the 4th dynasty. Now his full name, Khnum Khufu, translates to Khnum protects me. But Khufu didn't just start from scratch, you know? He was born into a golden age. His father, Pharaoh Sneferu, was a revolutionary builder who had actually perfected the art of pyramid construction before Khufu even took the throne. So from Sneferu, Khufu inherited this highly centralized, wealthy state equipped with specialized stone-cutting labor forces and some really advanced engineering knowledge.
But Khufu took it to the next level. He essentially engineered his entire government to execute his vision. He reorganized Egyptian governance to consolidate absolute power entirely within his own family. He appointed his nephew, or possibly his brother, historians are still debating that one, a man named Hemyunu, as his vizier and the overseer of royal works. By placing his closest relatives in literally every key economic, religious, and administrative post, he systematically gutted the political power of the regional governors known as the nomarchs. This ruthless, highly efficient bureaucratic machine was the exact mechanism that allowed him to focus the entire nation's wealth and labor onto this single megaproject.
Part 2. Logistics of a mega project.
But simply having absolute power at home wasn't going to magically stack millions of massive stones. Organizing and arranging those blocks required an unprecedented, empire-wide supply chain that stretched way beyond Egypt's borders. To get the resources he needed, Khufu dispatched military-backed mining expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula just to harvest the copper required to make the chisels and tools. Down south in Nubia, they quarried high-grade diorite and imported gold and ivory. And up north in Byblos, which is modern-day Lebanon, they conducted massive maritime trade to import high-grade cedar wood. So the crucial point here is that Khufu was running extensive international military and trade operations just to acquire the copper tools for his stonemasons and the cedar transport ships necessary, all before a single foundation block could even be laid at Giza.
Part 3. Ground-level execution, the Diary of Mir.
So how do we actually know the specific details of this logistical triumph on the ground? Well, in 2013, archaeologists made one of the most groundbreaking discoveries in modern Egyptology: the Wadi al-Jarf papyri. Also known as the Diary of Mir, these are literally the oldest written papyrus logs ever found in human history. Written by an ancient inspector named Mir, these daily logbooks explicitly detail the day-to-day operations of transporting the materials that built the Great Pyramid. We essentially have the ancient receipts. It gives us a real-time, on-the-ground look at exactly how those 2.3 million blocks were supplied. Mir's diary lays it all out. It details how workers quarried the high-grade white limestone at Tura, carefully loaded those massive multi-ton blocks onto specially designed transport boats, and then shipped them down the Nile River directly to Khufu's pyramid site at Giza. But the logistical brilliance absolutely didn't stop at the riverbank.
To answer our core question of how these 2.3 million blocks were actually arranged into a pyramid, engineering consensus points to a masterful combination of sledges and ramps. Workers placed the heavy stones on massive wooden sledges, pulling them across sand that was specifically moistened with water to have the friction. Genius, right? Once at the base of the pyramid, engineers utilized a complex system of ramps to assemble it. They likely used massive straight external ramps for the lower, heavier base blocks, and then internal spiraling ramps for the higher, tighter tiers to meticulously haul and stack each stone into its exact place. So the Nile River was the logistical highway, but ingenious friction management and ramp engineering were how the blocks were ultimately assembled and arranged.
Part 4. Debunking Ancient Myths. Now that we know how the raw stone arrived and was physically maneuvered into place, we have to ask a really important question. Who were the people actually doing this incredibly backbreaking work? Because for centuries, there's been a sharp divide between ancient gossip and historical reality. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing way later in the 5th century BC, claimed that Khufu was a wicked, tyrannical oppressor who closed all the temples and forced 100,000 oppressed slaves to build his pyramid. But our modern archaeological sources completely shatter this famous myth. The historical reality is that Khufu utilized a highly skilled, well-cared-for, and completely free workforce. Modern Egyptology proves these workers lived in a permanent village right at the site. They were well-fed with prime cuts of meat, and they even had access to advanced medical care. They definitely weren't slaves. They were esteemed laborers contributing to the most important state project of their entire lifetime.
Actually, if we look at the authentic ancient Egyptian cultural memory from the Middle Kingdom, we see a totally different picture of the pharaoh himself. As noted in texts like the Westcar Papyrus, Khufu was remembered not as some evil tyrant, but as a wise, curious king deeply interested in magic, prophecy, and seeking divine knowledge. He was an incredibly effective ruler who brought Old Kingdom engineering to its absolute staggering peak.
Part 5. The Grand Paradox.
Yet, despite orchestrating this flawless bureaucratic machine, managing an international supply chain, and literally building the ultimate eternal monument, history dealt Khufu a massive, almost tragic irony. Around 2566 BC, after ruling for over 2 decades, Khufu dies. His body goes through a 70-day mummification process and is placed deep within the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber inside a red granite sarcophagus. Now, interestingly, that sarcophagus was actually larger than the chamber's doorways, meaning it had to be placed inside while those 2.3 million blocks were actively being assembled around it. They even dropped massive granite portcullis slabs to permanently seal the passages. But during the chaotic First Intermediate Period, tomb robbers somehow breached the pyramid. They looted everything. The grave goods, the golden treasures, and Khufu's mummy itself were entirely lost. We did find his spectacular dismantled cedar solar barge in a sealed pit in 1954, a boat meant to carry his soul across the heavens. But the king himself was gone, leaving nothing but an empty sarcophagus.
Which brings us to our final and, frankly, highly surprising number for today's explainer: 7.5. We started with 2.3 million massive blocks, but we're going to end with just 7.5 centimeters.
This is what historians call the ivory statue paradox. Discovered in 1903 by Flinders Petrie at Abydos, this tiny 7.5 centimeter, or roughly 3-inch ivory figurine is the only confirmed 3-dimensional likeness of Khufu ever found. Think about that for a second. The man who consolidated a government, established complex international supply lines, and coordinated a sprawling empire to perfectly arrange 2.3 million towering stone blocks has only one confirmed surviving physical likeness today, and it's a tiny little carved statue that easily fits right in the palm of your hand.
Khufu's monument stands today as an enduring testament to ancient Egyptian engineering, mathematical precision, and absolute state organization. The Great Pyramid permanently transformed the landscape of the Giza Plateau, and it inspired centuries of successors. But this grand paradox leaves us with a fascinating final thought for this explainer. Khufu successfully built the largest and most enduring monument in human history, yet his true face literally fits in the palm of a hand. What does that ultimately tell us about the true nature of human legacy and what actually survives the test of time? Keep that in mind the next time you look at a photograph of the Great Pyramid. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep exploring.